There are distinct challenges that arise when trying to offer love to someone who isn't convinced that they are deep down worthy of such a thing. Imagine a relationship between Sarah and Dan. It began 3 months ago, and things are flourishing. 2 weekends ago, they went on a romantic break to Paris. Last weekend, she took him to meet her parents. And this weekend, they're going to see a group of his friends in the city where he attended university. All the signs indicate that they like each other very much and that the relationship has the potential to truly blossom. But let's also imagine a different part of the story. When Dan was a little boy, his mother was often offhand and uninterested in him, preferring to devote herself to his older sister. Though this was many years ago, and Dan is now accomplished in his profession and his life more broadly, he carries a wound just below the surface, a wound with the power to cause substantial difficulties in any love story in the here and now. The problems begin precisely when Sarah starts to offer him intense, genuine affection. It's not that her love is undesired. It's that, at an unconscious level, it is deeply difficult for him to accept. In order to protect himself from hurt, young Dan had to build his character to withstand isolation, endure loneliness, and survive on a meager emotional diet. He had to make his peace with deprivation and learn to doubt the sincerity of anyone who would wish to treat him well. Not coincidentally, he might have previously gone out with a number of women who were emotionally unavailable or offhand themselves. It was horrible, but in a twisted way, it felt like home. We might suppose that finally accepting a gift one has long been denied would be especially easy. But this isn't the way our minds work. At the arrival of exactly what they've always wanted, those who have been deprived tend to become extremely fussy and difficult, skeptical and argumentative. They cause a scene. They ruin the atmosphere. They try to bring down the temperature because they want to get away from what is experienced as secretly unbearable in its beauty, plenitude, and hopefulness. So, over dinner, out of the blue, Dan accuses Sarah of being sarcastic and disrespectful towards his taste in books. She's genuinely puzzled, but Dan digs in. "You aren't taking me seriously," he argues. "Dull. I'm so sorry if you got that impression, but it's not anything I feel," Sarah counters with maturity. But Dan won't be appeased. He crashes the entire evening. What had started so well ends in misery. The fancy Italian restaurant can't rescue the mood. The couple goes home in a sulk. Dan sleeps on the sofa, and the plans for the next day are canceled. All of this for apparently nothing, or rather, for something both entirely lamentable and psychologically compelling. Dan's need to ensure that love cannot threaten his defensive isolation. Dan is, in effect, crying out, "You can't really love me," not because his partner doesn't, but because his mother didn't. The skepticism created by one person is deposited decades later on the unwitting head of another. He is also implicitly saying, "You don't love me enough," or at least not in the right way. There is a fatefully demanding note in this. Dan can't seem to accept that Sarah is merely good enough rather than perfect, as no human can be. He uses her ordinary human characteristics as a weapon against her. If we think of it in terms of food, someone who is left to be very hungry may be especially tricky once a meal is finally offered. They may become excessively idealistic rather than realistic about what is good enough. Deprived people become more extreme in their fantasy of what they need, picturing the perfect meal because that fantasy has had so much work to do to tide them over through the long years of hunger. Dan should learn to understand that he's picking a fight because of a terror around trusting something that might yet turn out to be false. He would rather crash the relationship himself than be surprised yet again by the treachery of another person. In the original version of this story, Dan and Sarah might not be able to make it without the fundamental insight of modern psychotherapy, that the way we love now has to pass through the gate of the way we were loved then, and that if there were distortions originally, there will be distortions in the present. It seems we have no option but to understand our histories to liberate ourselves from their sad strictures. But this doesn't have to be the end of their story. The next morning, the air is thick with unspoken tension. Instead of leaving, Sarah makes them both a cup of coffee and sits on the floor by the sofa where Dan is pretending to be asleep. "Dan," she says softly, "this wasn't about the books, was it? It feels like every time we take a step closer, something happens, and you push me away. I care about you too much to watch this destroy what we have. Talk to me." Her words, full of patience instead of anger, crack through his defenses. For the first time, Dan doesn't lash out. He opens up, hesitantly at first, about his fears of being a disappointment, of not being enough. He doesn't need to tell her his entire life story, but he admits he's scared of being hurt again. It's a breakthrough. That conversation marked the beginning of their real journey. With Sarah's encouragement, Dan sought therapy to unpack the wounds of his childhood. It wasn't an easy or quick fix. There were still difficult days, but now they had a shared language to understand what was happening. Dan learned to recognize the voice of his past fear and to not let it dictate his present. He slowly learned to accept Sarah's love not as a threat, but as the nourishing gift it truly was. A year later, they went back to Paris. This time, there were no grand gestures, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. They had built a love that was not perfect, but resilient, honest, and strong enough to heal the deepest of wounds. Dan and Sarah's journey shows that understanding our past is the key to building a healthier future. Their story is a testament to the power of courage, patience, and communication in overcoming the ghosts that haunt our relationships. If you found this story insightful and want to explore more about the psychology of relationships and personal growth, please consider subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. Thank you for watching.